Good morning. Welcome to my kitchen. One of the biggest things that is on my before baby to-do list is to meal prep. And this time I really want to take meal prep a little bit more seriously. It's something that I've kind of done with all of my other babies. But this time I really want to take it to the next level and prepare enough meals to last us like 2 weeks. I'm talking breakfast, dinner, lunches, snacks, the whole shebang. So I have prepped and prepared a really good meal list. Some of these recipes are new to me. Some of them are tried and true favorites of ours. And this video would be way too long if I shared absolutely everything that I'm prepping. So if you want a full list of all of my meal plans, my meal prep, suppers, breakfast, snacks, and everything, I'm gonna try and get a blog post up with links to everything, recipes if I don't have links to a recipe. So if you're in the same boat and you are here because you need some real good meal prep inspiration, you can go to that blog post and get an idea of what we're making. We're people who like a variety of food. We don't like the same thing over and over and over. So I tried to get a really good variety going here. And for every meal that is on this list, I am making a double recipe. I figure while I'm in the kitchen and I'm making these things anyway, I might as well make twice as much, and then it'll last us for 2 suppers instead of 1. And you're going to notice I'm not doing any like lunch specific meals because 9 times out of 10, we are eating leftovers from the supper before for lunch. So what you saw me do this morning is get my sourdough sandwich loaf bread going. I have been making so much bread lately. Pretty much every day that I am home for a day, I'm making a batch of bread. Throwing this in the freezer, and I'm gonna let it just be there until we need it. Got a big few days ahead of us, so come along with me and let's do this. All right, we are gonna start off with the breakfast and snacks category. I grouped these together because everything that I'm making as meal prep for breakfast can also be doubled as a snack. So we're gonna start with granola. This is a recent thing that I've started making. I don't know why it took me so long to start making this from scratch because it's so easy and so yummy. We go through so much of this. So this particular one is a pumpkin flax granola recipe. It is one I found on Pinterest and I will link it below. And with every recipe, I kind of tweak it a little bit. So I'm going to tell you what I put in it, but if you want to see the original recipe, definitely go down and check that link. But I did 3 cups of rolled oats, a 3/4 cup of pumpkin seeds, a 1/4 cup of chia seeds, 1/3 cup of chopped pecans, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, and then 1/2 teaspoon of salt as well. That's all of the dry ingredients. So you just mix it all together. Super easy. This is a great one for the kids to help with too because it is so simple and so easy and they can snack on these things too. Then a 1/4 cup of melted coconut oil and give that a good mix. Make sure everything is nice and coated. And then I'll go in with the sweeteners. So there is 1/3 cup of honey, a 1/4 cup of maple syrup, and then a teaspoon of vanilla. Give that all a good mix and then pour it over a baking sheet lined with parchment paper. Spread it around evenly and pop this into the oven, I believe at 350 degrees for about 30 minutes. So I'll take it out about 2 or 3 times during that baking period to give it a stir, just to make sure that everything is baking evenly. I don't watch the timer too closely. I kind of just go until it looks toasty. And then as it cools down, it will harden and become like nice crunchy granola. Now I also love adding chocolate chips to my granola because I'm a huge chocolate fan. So I'll add a whole bunch of chocolate chips to this, and then for freezing this, I separated these 2 batches into 4 bags. So each bag has a 1/2 batch. I do realize that adding the chocolate chips beforehand was probably a bad idea, but I will say we've already gone through a batch of this and I've pulled one out of the freezer and the chocolate chips are totally fine. I make sure to label everything as well as date it, and then I just pop that into the freezer. Next up is banana muffins, and I'm going to apologize in advance because I can't actually give you this recipe because this is a recipe that I had made so many times while I was baking at a cafe like 6 years ago before Eloise was born. I had memorized it and it's been stuck in my head ever since, and I keep going back to it because it's so good. So I can't actually share with you this particular recipe. It is vegan though, fun fact. But when my bananas start getting too ripe, I will do one of two things. I will either freeze them whole for smoothies or whatever, or I will mash them and then measure them out and put them into a freezer bag like this. That way when I want to make banana muffins, I can just pull it out of the freezer and we're good to go. When I worked at a cafe, I did learn how to bake vegan and gluten-free. I don't do that now because we are not vegan or gluten-free, but if for whatever reason I want to swap out a real egg for a vegan egg, I will mix together chia seeds and water, or flaxseed, ground flaxseed and water to make a vegan egg, and it works just the same. I make muffins on a very regular basis. They are such a good go-to, like on-the-go snack, especially for days when we're running out of the house in the morning. We can have it for breakfast. And I think I've made this particular recipe with each postpartum experience. Like I've made a big batch and I've frozen them. And they make fantastic late night breastfeeding snacks, I'll say that. But I love the versatility of muffins. Like they're single servings, they're easy to freeze, or you can make it into a loaf, just pour it into a loaf pan. Like they're so easy. So you're actually going to see a number of different muffin recipes in this video. I made banana muffins. I also made my favorite chocolate sourdough muffins, which is delicious, and I will leave that one linked below. And now we are making some carrot muffins. This was a new to me recipe. It's another one I found on Pinterest. I wasn't sure how it was gonna go, but it was a favorite. Zach had many muffins, and Zach isn't a huge like sweets person, so if he eats a lot of it, I know that it's good. And this one is a little bit more on the healthy side as well. That's kind of how I judge whether or not something is good, is if Zach eats a lot of it, then that's a huge compliment. Actually, this is how I like to make a lot of my meal prep on a regular basis. If I'm making something, I'll just make a double batch of it, and then we'll eat half of it, and then I'll freeze the other half, which is what I'm doing this morning. It's a Sunday morning. I've got my hair up. It's early in the morning before the family wakes up, and I'm making muffins for everyone. So I'm starting off by preparing the carrots. I'm peeling them and then shredding them. And then I did this over top of a tea towel just so that they wouldn't be too wet and they could dry a little bit because I didn't want the batter to be too wet. Then I sifted 2 cups of flour, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, half a teaspoon of baking soda, half a teaspoon of salt, 1 cup of sugar. I use cane sugar. 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, half a teaspoon of nutmeg. And then to the dry ingredients, I also added 1 cup of rolled oats and gave that all a mix. Now to the wet ingredients, you're going to need 2 eggs, 1/4 cup of vegetable oil, 1.5 cups of plain yogurt, and then 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Now I did find, you're gonna see this in a minute, that when I mixed these together, it became a very stiff dough, like not like a muffin dough. It was very stiff. Oh, I also added the carrots at the end here. Because it was so thick, I ended up adding probably like 1/4 cup to half a cup of milk as well, just to kind of give it that right muffin consistency. And this worked really well. Like they turned out beautifully. So I divided up the batter and topped it off with a streusel topping. For that topping, you're going to need 3 tablespoons of butter softened, 2 tablespoons of flour, 3 tablespoons of oats, 3 tablespoons of sugar, and 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. I sprinkle that over top of the muffins. I bake them at 350 for about 30 minutes or so. These were so good. We actually ended up eating most of them, so I didn't have a whole lot of them to freeze, but definitely one I will be making again. Now you are seeing me tackle the next stage of my sourdough sandwich loaf. I will mix the dough early in the morning and get it rising, and then about 2 to 3 hours later is when I will mold and shape the dough, which is what I'm doing now. And speaking of, this recipe is officially live on the blog. You guys have been waiting so long for this, and it's been a very highly requested and much anticipated recipe. I'm so happy to finally have it up there for you. This isn't my original recipe. I got it from my sister-in-law, who got it from a friend, and I don't know where it originated from, but I did tweak it just a little bit to make it more moist, and it's delicious. We have very much enjoyed fresh homemade bread, and since I've been making this, I don't think I've bought store-bought bread in at least a few months now, which is huge for me. So I'll leave that recipe link down below. There's also a number of other recipes that I make on a daily basis on the blog as well. I've done my grandma's quick pickle recipe, which is so good. It was my biggest pregnancy craving in the very beginning of this pregnancy, as well as my easy homemade yogurt that I've been making for the last year. The next recipe I'm sharing is these breakfast bars. This was a new to me recipe. I had never made these before, so I wasn't really sure what I was in for, but I thought this would be something easy to freeze, a little bit on the healthier side, but also would make a fantastic midnight snack. So I'm starting with 1 cup of rolled oats and then a 1/4 cup of flour. I used my regular unbleached organic all-purpose flour, which is what I use for everything. 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and that's all the dry ingredients. So I added those all together, gave it a mix, and moved on to the wet ingredients. I love making things like this, by the way. They're so easy. It's just dry ingredients, wet ingredients, mix, put in a pan, throw in the oven, so simple. For the wet ingredients, you're going to need 2 tablespoons of coconut oil, 2 eggs, 1/4 cup of maple syrup, 1/4 cup of peanut butter, 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla, and just give that all a mix. Then add the dry ingredients into the wet ingredients. This is where I started getting a little bit unsure about this particular recipe because it looked very wet and not at all cake-like, like the picture of the recipe showed, but I went with it anyway. I just trusted the process. I also added 1/3 cup of chocolate chips to the mix. Spread it out onto a pan, greased and lined with parchment paper, and I threw it into the oven at 350 for 20 to 25 minutes, and I was very surprised to see this come out exactly as the picture looked, and it was really good. So I took it out of the pan. Once it had cooled down, I sliced it up into bars, and I just popped it into a container just like that and threw it in the freezer, so it's easy to access, and it's ready to go. Now, amongst these recipes, I also did protein balls, which is another Pinterest recipe that I've made a number of times before, and I did a gigantic batch of pancakes, which I then froze. These are so great for breakfast, quick breakfast, because you can just pop them in the toaster. And again, you can go to that blog post and see all of these recipes, all of the links, my entire meal plan, everything is all laid out there for you. Now we are taking a brief intermission to wash dishes. I cannot count how many times I wash dishes in these few days. But a huge tip I've learned in recent years in order to make cooking feel a lot more enjoyable and attainable is to just continually do dishes. As soon as a dish is dirty, don't put it in the sink, put it in the dishwasher. If you don't have a dishwasher, make sure you're constantly washing the dishes and you're not letting it pile up. I hand wash dishes probably 3 times a day after every single meal. Just having the dishes done like that makes it so much more inviting to come into the kitchen. Now we're moving on to suppers and lunches. We're going to start off with a family favorite, sweet and sour sausage. This is not a healthy recipe, I will say that. But it is a comfort food for us. Specifically for me, I have fond memories of eating this particular meal after giving birth to Theo. I remember my mother-in-law asking what I wanted as a meal, and this is what I requested because this sounded so good. And so it's kind of nostalgic for me. It's a really simple, easy recipe. It also makes a great freezer meal. So I start off with slicing Mennonite sausage and frying it up in a pot. Now, I don't know if this particular type of sausage is available around the world. Zach's family actually makes their own sausage every year, which is so cool, and then we get to have some of that. So we get freshly made sausage. There's literally just the meat, salt, pepper, and then they're smoked. But I get that cooking, and once that has cooked through, I take it out and set it aside and use that same pot to make the sauce. So for the sauce, you need 1 cup of brown sugar, half a cup of ketchup, a 1/4 cup of vinegar, and 2 cups of water. Add that all to the pot, give it a whisk, and let it come to a boil. And like I said, this isn't a healthy recipe. There's a lot of sugar in this particular one, but sometimes that's okay. While that is coming to a boil, I'll mix together 2 tablespoons of cornstarch with a little bit of water to make a slurry. And then I will set this aside until I'm ready to use it. So when the sauce starts boiling, very, very slowly start adding your cornstarch mixture into the sauce while whisking. This is important to do it slowly while whisking, otherwise lumps will form. Let the cornstarch cook through, let it come to a boil again and cook for a minute or 2, and then add the sausage back in. We serve this over rice and a vegetable of some kind. Next up is beef stroganoff. This is a really easy, really quick meal that I have made a number of times in the past. I like to start off by chopping up the veggies. So you're going to need half a medium onion, diced, and 1 pound of mushrooms sliced. There is something about just chopping veggies that I find so satisfying. I don't know why, but it's just such a calming thing for me to do. In a pan, you're going to fry 1 pound of lean ground beef. Pro tip, use a potato masher to break up the ground beef. This works so good. I don't know if this is a thing that a lot of people know about or not, but I recently figured this out and it's brilliant. Add in your garlic cloves, let those cook for a couple of minutes, and then add the chopped mushrooms. You'll want to let this cook until the water is evaporated from the mushrooms. It doesn't take too long. And then go in with 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. Mix that together, let it cook until no white remains. Then you can add some of the sauce ingredients. So you're going to need 1 cup of beef broth, 1 cup of whipping cream. I usually do half whipping cream and half milk just so it's less heavy. You're also going to need 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. A half a teaspoon of salt and half a teaspoon of ground black pepper. Once that has cooked through, the sauce is thickened, it's looking nice, it's smelling delicious, you can remove it from the heat and add in about 1/3 cup of sour cream. And then alongside the sweet and sour sausage, I just let this sit and cool down before putting it into freezer bags. Now you can see my bread loaves have risen significantly and it's time to put them into the oven. This is an all-day process, but I'm usually done baking them before supper time. That way they have time to cool, and then in the evening I can wrap them up and freeze them. Now as for freezing, what I did was I made sure to label each bag very clearly with instructions. I think most of the time my husband is going to be making these meals, and so I wanted to give him clear instructions that were easy to follow. Most of these meals he just has to pour into a pot and let it warm up, and then cook some rice on the side, maybe steam some broccoli on the side, and that's it. Like, very simple, very easy. For the beef stroganoff, all he has to do is cook some noodles, warm up the beef. I'm trying to keep it as simple and easy as possible, but also for myself, because I'm gonna have baby brain and who knows the kind of mistakes I'm gonna be making in the near future. So to have clear instructions is always a good idea, as well as the date. I always try and remember to label and date everything I put into the freezer. Otherwise, I forget about it. I also made some meatballs in addition to these other recipes. I bagged them up, labeled them all, and popped them into the freezer. And just like that, I had 6 meals ready to go. Now that same day, I also made another family favorite. These are spinach rolls, but basically you could call it a vegetarian lasagna. Now, for us to eat a vegetarian meal, it doesn't happen very often. We're big meat people, especially my husband, but this particular recipe, my mother-in-law used to make it all the time. Remember eating it all the time when we were dating, and I've just carried it on into our house as well. So I'm starting by cooking 12 lasagna noodles, and then for the cheese mixture, I am draining some frozen spinach as well as some cottage cheese. I'm getting as much of the liquid out as possible just so that the lasagna doesn't get too runny. So you're going to need about 250 grams of frozen chopped spinach as well as a 500-gram carton of cottage cheese. To that mixture, you're going to add 2 cups of shredded mozzarella, half a cup of Parmesan cheese, and 2 eggs. Like I said before, what you're seeing here is a double batch, but the recipe that I'm giving you is a single recipe. So not to be confused, what you're seeing is twice the amount of what I'm telling you. And then it's time to layer everything up. I'm doing this just in tins because it's a freezer meal. It's quick and it's easy. So normally you would roll up the cheese mixture inside the lasagna noodle and then layer it in the pan with tomato sauce. But because I want this to be faster and easier, I'm just layering it like a classic lasagna. So I start with the tomato sauce, then I go in with a layer of noodles, then the cheese, then the tomato sauce, then noodles, and then one last layer of tomato sauce, and then I sprinkled cheese on top to give it that extra bubbly, cheesy goodness. I'm closing these up and then labeling very clearly, once again with baking instructions. I want to do something a little bit different, so I am doing homemade pizza. Homemade pizza is probably one of our most favorite dinners, and it's so easy to just throw into the oven, or Zach will throw it onto the smoker, and it's so good. Now again, this pizza crust is one I can't actually share with you because it is a recipe that is not my own, but I will see if I can link a similar recipe down below. I am on the hunt for a good sourdough pizza crust recipe though, so if you have any suggestions, let me know in the comments. Over the last number of months, I've really been trying to make a lot more of our breads homemade. I'm trying to buy less store-bought processed stuff. And so I've been getting very familiar with things like homemade bread and pizza crust and even like homemade tortillas and pitas and things like that. And it's been a really fun little adventure. Once the dough had risen, I divided it up into 4 pieces. I don't know how people do pizza dough. Like how do you stretch it in a way that isn't like this? I don't know. I just do my best to try and stretch it out. I'm not very good at it, but it works. So I'm making 2 very simple pizzas. I'm just doing like a margarita type pizza. I don't even know if I can even call it that. But I started with olive oil, salt, and oregano as the base, and now I'm layering on some fresh mozzarella cheese. Normally I would dice some tomatoes and put them on here. I didn't have any today, but I did have some fresh local deli ham, so I threw some of that on. I got some basil from our garden, threw that on as well. And then in order to freeze this, I trimmed off the excess parchment paper, and then I'm using a lot of saran wrap. And now, normally it's something I wouldn't do, but I couldn't think of any other way to freeze this because these pizzas are quite large. So I ended up wrapping these up completely in saran wrap and then popping them into the freezer that way. For the second pizza, I just did a simple ham and cheese because that's the kids' favorite. So just tomato sauce. I had some frozen deli meat in the freezer, so I just used that up, shredded some cheese, and that was it. Again, I'm trimming away the parchment paper and then wrapping it all up in saran wrap. In order to get these to freeze flat, I ended up putting them on cardboard and then carefully slipping them on top of the other stuff I already had in the freezer. This actually worked really well. And then when it was frozen, I stacked them on top of each other. Moving on to some more simple recipes. I have not actually tried these recipes yet, so I can't tell you whether or not they're good, but I found an awesome blog post on Pinterest with some really good sounding different recipes. You know, I feel like a lot of the freezer meal recipes out there are just the same. So that's kind of why I wanted to make this video, is to give you some different ideas. So I'm really excited to try these. These are more slow cooker meals, so it's literally just like throwing everything into a bag and then later throwing it into a slow cooker. So the first one I'm making is sesame chicken. I chopped up 2 pounds of chicken breasts, put them into a bag, and then I'm mixing together the sauce, which is half a cup of honey, 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, 2 teaspoons of minced garlic, 2 teaspoons of sesame seeds, and I just mixed this all together and divided it into 2 bags. To be clear, I actually made a quadruple recipe so that each bag had a double recipe of sauce in it. Now to the bags of chicken, I am also adding a 1/3 cup of cornstarch, giving that all a mix. I actually found it was easier to mix this with some air in the bags instead of squeezing all the air out first, and then I reopened the bags and sealed them off without the air inside. Then on a separate large Ziploc bag, I wrote out the instructions that the recipe called for. I think we might actually serve this over rice with some broccoli just to keep it really simple. Then I popped the chicken bag and a sauce bag into that other bag, and so hopefully this will be very easy to put together later on. Next is chicken French dip sandwiches. Again, this is another one that is new to me. I have not tried, but it sounded delicious. It's actually in that same blog post, and I will leave that blog post link below because it is fantastic. Starting off with the broth, you'll need half a large onion pureed. Then in a bowl, mix that together with 2 teaspoons of butter, a 14.5 ounce can of beef broth, 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. Honestly, I didn't have this, so I skipped it, and I'll try and remember to add it later on. 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, 1 tablespoon of minced garlic, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of parsley, half a teaspoon of black pepper, and a 1/4 teaspoon of thyme. Mix that all together, pour it into your bags. Don't forget to write the instructions, the title, and the date on that bag. And then just add your chicken to the bags and freeze. It's so easy, so quick to put together. Oh, and we're taking another quick dish cleaning break. To cook this one, I think you throw everything into a slow cooker, then shred the chicken, separate the fat from the broth, and then the broth is then used as a dipping sauce, and you can put the chicken on a bun, dip it in the sauce. Delicious. Moving on to a chicken peanut curry. This is one that I started making probably like 5 years ago, and it's been on my recipe list ever since. I don't remember where I got this one from, but it has been a family favorite for a long time. I like to start off by prepping all of my ingredients beforehand. So for this spice blend, you're going to need 2 teaspoons of coriander, 2 teaspoons of cumin, 1 teaspoon of turmeric, 1 teaspoon of paprika, 1 teaspoon of salt. Give that all a mix and then set this aside. Then you're going to need chicken, and you're going to need a lot of chicken. The recipe calls for 2.5 pounds of chicken. I don't think I used quite that much. I also doubled the recipe, so it seemed like I was just chopping chicken forever. Then for veggies, you're going to need 2 zucchini, 2 sweet bell peppers, and then 1 large onion. I actually had some bell pepper chopped and frozen in my freezer, so I thought this was the perfect opportunity to use that up. If you ever have like vegetables going bad, chop them up, throw them in the freezer. You can use them for all kinds of different cooking, and then they don't go bad. So to make this, start by chopping up your chicken and then sprinkling over half of the spice blend, massaging that all over the chicken, getting it good and coated. Then you're going to throw this into a pot with some oil, and you want to at least get the chicken browned. You don't have to get it fully cooked through, but you want it browned. I switched over to a bigger pot because I realized I needed more space. But if you're using the same spot, then you would remove the chicken, get some oil heating up, and then add your chopped onion, 1 tablespoon of ginger, and 6 cloves of minced garlic. Get this cooking, then add in the rest of your spice blend and let that cook for a little while. Then you can start adding your sauce ingredients. So for this, you're going to need 1/2 cup of ketchup. Yes, I know that's weird, but trust me. A 3/4 cup of peanut butter, 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, and then 4 cups of chicken broth. Mix this all together, let it come to a simmer. You actually want to let this simmer for about 30 minutes or so until it's slightly thickened. Then you can add your chicken back into the sauce and your chopped veggies. Mix this up, let this cook until the veggies are fully cooked through and your curry is ready. I let this cool down overnight, and then the next day I divided it up into 3 bakes actually, because this makes quite a bit. So I figured a double batch could easily last us 3 meals instead of just 2. We serve this over rice, we'll have it with naan bread, and it's really, really good. I made a number of other meals off camera that I did not share with you today, but again, they will be on the blog post. I'll have all of that linked down below for you. I think honestly, after all was said and done, I ended up with almost a month's worth of freezer meals. And a number of breakfast and snacky foods as well. You will notice I didn't do any like savory breakfast foods, and that's because honestly it's really easy to crack an egg and cook an egg. Zach is very, very capable of doing that stuff. It's not hard to do, and so breakfasts in our house are generally very simple anyway, so I didn't stress too much about that stuff. I mostly wanted to focus on some breakfasty things that could also double as snacks. And so there you have it. There we have for sure 2 weeks worth of meals, probably closer to 3, almost 4. My freezer is good and stocked, and I'm feeling so much more prepared now for baby to come and so much more ready. And that's it. That's the end of the video. It's a long one, I know. I hope you enjoyed. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe. We've got a lot of exciting stuff coming up here in our lives with the baby coming very, very, very soon. We are thrilled and so excited, and we would be honored to have you join us in this journey. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.